Some things start as whispers. At first, they hover near your ears, just a vague feeling. Then that feeling seeps under your skin, turning into a glance, a touch, a moment. Eventually, you reach a point where you can't pretend it isn't there anymore. Those moments scared me the most. I'm Evelyn, 45 years old. My entire life, I tried to do the right thing. I believed my second marriage would bring me stability, but Mark didn't give me peace, he gave me solitude. His absence had become so routine that I stopped noticing it, at least until I started losing myself in someone else's gaze. Ryan, Mark's son from his first marriage, 30 years old, confident, composed, the kind of man you notice when he walks into a room. When I first met him, he kept his distance, but over time the space between us shrank. Now he was too close, too warm, and we both knew it. Yet we pretended otherwise. That night, when the storm knocked out the power, I was alone. I went to the kitchen to find a candle, but an uneasy feeling settled deep in my chest. I called Mark. "What do you want me to do, Evelyn? I'm out of town." His voice was impatient, indifferent, as always. "I'm alone," I said quietly. A pause. Just for a second. Then his response came, "I'll send Ryan over." I didn't reply, but something inside me trembled. Half an hour later, Ryan was at the door, a flashlight in hand, that familiar look on his face, the one that always said too much without actually saying anything. "Dad said you were freaking out," he said, his voice calm but edged with something else, something playful. "I just don't like being alone," I replied. I realized then that my fingers were gripping the edge of the door frame a little too tightly. Ryan stepped inside. It had been raining, his leather jacket was damp, his broad shoulders gleaming under the dim glow of the flashlight. I shut the door behind him. "The power's still out," I muttered. Ryan's eyes locked onto mine. "Is that a bad thing?" Something inside me snapped. I knew I couldn't pretend anymore. Ryan tilted his head slightly, still standing at the door. Then he lifted the flashlight, shining it directly at my face. I squinted as my eyes adjusted, but I could feel his gaze traveling downward. I was in my usual home clothes, a thin slip dress that barely reached mid-thigh. I wasn't wearing anything underneath. I had been about to go to bed when the storm knocked the power out. I had thrown a cardigan over my shoulders, but I hadn't tied it. My feet were bare. Ryan's eyes lingered at my ankles for a moment, then slowly trailed upward. "Anyway," he said, his voice low, "go sit on the couch. I'll check the fuse box." A strange unease stirred inside me. I was tense, but I didn't know why. Ryan lived alone, just 20 minutes away. His own place, his own routine, his own life. But right now, he was here, in this house, with me. I silently made my way to the couch in the living room while Ryan walked toward the fuse box, flashlight in hand. I took a deep breath, clasping my hands together in my lap. That's when I realized my whole body was tense. He flipped a switch. Click. For a brief second, the lights flickered, but then everything went dark again. Ryan let out a sigh. "Probably too much load on one of the circuits," he muttered. Then he turned his flashlight toward the kitchen. "Let me check what's causing it." I nodded, but didn't move. My heartbeat was unsteady. I hadn't noticed at first. But Ryan hadn't gone down to the basement where the fuse box was. Instead, he had stepped into the kitchen. A deep silence filled the house. The air felt thick, charged with something unspoken. The whispers that had started so softly had turned into something undeniable. And in that moment, in the quiet darkness, I knew Ryan wasn't just fixing the power, he was waiting. Then something fell. A loud metallic clang echoed through the dark. I jumped. "Ryan?" My voice came out unsteady. No answer. I stood quickly, walking toward the pitch-black kitchen. My pulse pounded in my ears. "Ryan?" I called again, taking another cautious step forward. Still nothing. The moonlight filtering through the kitchen window cast faint shadows across the floor, but everything remained hidden in darkness. I couldn't see him, but I felt something, a movement, slight yet undeniable. Just as I was about to turn, my chest collided with something solid, a body. Ryan. The flashlight had slipped from his hand, its beam now cast off to the side, illumining only a sliver of the floor. His warm, firm body pressed against mine, and for a brief moment, a shock wave ran through me. Instinctively, I tried to step back, but Ryan was standing too close. "You came into the kitchen too?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. I didn't know where you were," I murmured, my breath coming out uneven. Ryan's hand barely brushed my waist, maybe just for balance, but my body registered it as something much more. The warmth of his fingers lingered, sending a shiver through me. In the darkness, we couldn't see each other, we could only feel. And in that moment, I realized that the pull we had been pretending didn't exist, had grown too strong to ignore. Our breathing was the only sound in the heavy silence. Ryan's breath was too close, and there was nothing stopping us from locking eyes. Except we couldn't, because everything around us was pitch black. I placed my hand on his chest, intending to step back slightly, but he didn't move, and neither did I. "Evelyn." Just hearing my name in his voice sent another shiver through me. I needed to snap out of it. Shaking my head slightly, I forced myself to focus, inhaling an unsteady breath. "What's the problem?" I asked, determined to sound normal. Ryan hesitated, then slowly pulled his hand away from my waist, but he was still close, too close. "The washing machine," he finally murmured. "It must have been running when the power went out and is trying to start back up." I swallowed hard. "So, we need to unplug it, right?" He nodded, but didn't move right away. The tension in the air thickened, something unseen yet completely felt. Finally, his silhouette shifted in the dim light as he moved toward the washing machine. I watched his outline, barely visible in the dark, my body still rigid. Then, another clang echoed through the room. I flinched. "What was that?" I whispered. Ryan had crouched down, but he lifted his head slightly, his lips curving into a smile. "Think I knocked something over," he said, his voice calm. Too calm. Then he reached for the plug and pulled it out. The soft hum of the machine ceased instantly. I exhaled deeply, pressing my back against the counter, trying to steady myself. My heartbeat was still erratic. I told myself to calm down, to shake it off. But how was I supposed to? Even in the darkness, nothing had changed, because feelings, they didn't need light to be felt. Ryan straightened up again, his movements slow and deliberate. I felt his gaze on me, even in the absence of light. "Why do you seem so tense?" he asked, his tone slightly teasing, but underneath it, there was something else. "I'm not tense," I shot back immediately, but we both knew I was. But Ryan didn't look convinced. I heard his footsteps in the dark. One step, then another. "I know," he said slowly. "I'm tense too." Something tightened inside me. I didn't know what to do. Should I step back? Should I look somewhere else in the room? But I didn't do any of those things because Ryan was right in front of me and I had let him get this close. For a moment, I had no idea what was going to happen next. Ryan was still standing there, his voice low, our bodies almost touching. At that moment, I realized that turning the power back on had become just an excuse. We didn't need excuses to stretch out this moment. But then, suddenly, Ryan pulled back. "Let me take care of the fuse first," he said, his voice still rough around the edges. I just nodded. I couldn't bring myself to say anything. Ryan walked out of the kitchen toward the fuse box. Even as I listened to his footsteps fade, the weight pressing down on me hadn't lifted. Then, click. A moment of silence, and then a sudden flash of light filled the kitchen and the rest of the house. As my eyes adjusted, I realized something. I felt exposed. The darkness had been a shield wrapping around me, but now everything was out in the open. Ryan turned back around. The dim glow highlighted his face, and his leather jacket, still damp from the rain, looked even darker under the light. "All right," he said with a slight smile. "Problem solved." Then he tilted his head slightly, studying me, his brows raising just a little. "But you still look tense." I swallowed. "I just got startled, that's all." Ryan let out a small chuckle, but his eyes never lost their focus. "Or," he said, stepping further into the kitchen, "is there another reason?" That feeling inside me stirred again, that uncomfortable but intoxicating feeling. "I don't know," I admitted. Was that my voice shaking? Ryan took another step. Now he was standing right in front of me. "Evelyn, you've changed lately," he said, his voice quieter now but focused. My breathing picked up. "What do you mean?" Ryan didn't look away. "You used to be calmer, stronger, but now you feel lost, don't you?" Something in me clenched. "Ryan, But I couldn't finish my sentence because he was right. Mark had left me alone for years, even when he was there. At first I waited, then I gave up. Then I realized I didn't even recognize myself anymore. I had become weak, lost, invisible, and Ryan saw it. He placed his hand on the table, close but not too close. He wasn't trapping me, but if I moved just a little, I could touch him. "I care about you," he said, his voice soft but steady. Something inside me shivered. "You pretend like you don't feel anything," he continued, "but you do, don't you? Mark left you alone. He said he loved you, but he never showed it, and you got used to that. He reached up, fingers brushing lightly past my hair. "But Evelyn," he whispered, "I see you." Just like that, everything I had been holding in got caught in my throat. My eyes burned, but I refused to look at him. Yet I couldn't help it, because there was something in his eyes too: loneliness, understanding, and something else. I took a deep breath and pulled back slightly. But Ryan didn't move. I wasn't always like this," I whispered, "but now I don't even know who I am anymore." Ryan shook his head. "You're still the same. You just need to remember." And then, just like that, the tears spilled down my cheeks. I instinctively reached up to wipe them, but Ryan just tilted his head and watched me. "How long have you felt this way?" he asked. It was too hard to answer, so I just whispered, "A long time." Ryan didn't look away. "Me too." And that was what broke the last of my resistance, because this moment, it wasn't just about me. He was alone too. He wanted to be seen, to matter. The silence in the kitchen grew heavier as my tears continued to fall. Ryan didn't judge me, he just understood. I had been alone for so long that this warmth, this moment wrapping around me, felt completely foreign, but it also felt terrifyingly right. Ryan let out a slow breath, lifting his hand from the table and leaning back slightly. "Come on," he said, nodding toward the living room. "You look exhausted. No way we're celebrating me fixing the fuse like this." I forced a small smile, but something inside me was still trembling. We walked into the living room together. Ryan sat at one end of the couch, and I settled beside him. He had taken off his leather jacket, his t-shirt clinging to his body, still slightly damp. He ran his fingers through his hair. He looked exhausted. I was exhausted too, but not just tonight, for years. Lost in the emptiness I had been drowning in for so long, I didn't even realize when I let my head rest against Ryan's shoulder. His body was warm, solid, and for the first time in my life, I felt like someone was actually holding me. His breathing slowed. So did mine. And before I knew it, my eyes drifted shut. When I woke up, the room was dimly lit. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I felt it, my head still resting on Ryan's shoulder. More importantly, his head was leaning slightly against mine too. My breath caught. Ryan stirred slowly, his eyes opening. He lifted his head just a little, just enough for our eyes to meet. For a second, we just looked at each other. But that look, there was so much in that look. A warmth spread through me. My heartbeat kicked up. Ryan's gaze dropped to my lips, and then he leaned in. My breath hitched. He kissed me. At first it was slow, hesitant, but then everything we had been holding back crashed into that moment. My hands moved on their own, sliding over his shoulders. Ryan's hand found my waist, pulling me closer. This was it, something long buried, something forgotten, rising from the ashes, and this time, I wanted it. I kissed him back fully, deliberately, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. When Ryan finally pulled away, we were both breathless. We looked at each other, his eyes still exploring me, still wanting me, and for the first time, I wasn't trying to run from it. Ryan didn't look away. Instead, he whispered, his voice deep and slow. "I've liked you for a long time." My breath was unsteady, but his words unlocked something inside me, something that had been shut away for years. I swallowed, letting go of the turmoil inside me, and took a step toward him. I didn't break eye contact. I let everything I had been suppressing pour out. I've never felt anything this right before. Ryan didn't hesitate, not for a second. He just watched me. And then we both moved at the same time, slow at first, then faster. Our lips crashed together again. This time there was no hesitation, no restraint, no denial. My hands slid up to his shoulders. His hands found my waist, pulling me in closer. My heart was pounding as we kissed. My fingers trailed down his arms, and then my hand reached for my strap. My breath caught as my fingers hooked around them, and slowly I slid them down. Ryan froze as he watched me, but his eyes, they never left mine. He was seeing me. He was loving me. And that's why, without a second thought, I let myself sink down onto the couch. Ryan inhaled sharply, and in that moment I knew there was no turning back for him either. Ryan placed his knee on the couch, turning his face toward me as I lay back. I could see him freeing himself from his clothes, and it affected me more than I could put into words. He understood me. He cared about me. He was young and unbelievably handsome. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. Just then, I noticed the slow movement of his hand, and I loved it. I felt something bigger than anything I had ever known before. This time, I didn't want to surrender to excitement. I wanted to surrender to emotion. I wasn't alone. I could feel that in every inch of my body. I opened my eyes, letting my hands slide down from Ryan's shoulders. I wrapped my arms tightly around my own legs. Ryan, breathless and flushed, looked irresistible, and in that exact moment, my body tensed. My nails felt like they were almost piercing into my thighs. My legs locked completely, and with a loud cry, I surrendered myself. I was instinctively begging Ryan to do the same. It didn't take long. He listened. I felt a deep warmth inside me, and afterward I whispered a soft, "Thank you." When he lay down beside me, he was completely out of breath. We didn't say a single word. I just listened to his heartbeat, waiting for his breathing to steady, and before I knew it, I had fallen asleep right there. I knew Mark wasn't coming home, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Nothing but this sense of relief, this peace. As I slipped into sleep for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. When I woke up that morning, I had no idea Ryan had a surprise waiting for me. I had never woken up this happy before, never felt so in love that I wanted to throw myself into a man's arms the second I opened my eyes. But this time, everything was going to go even further. Stay tuned because this story isn't over. If you've made it this far, I know this story has pulled you in deep. There's so much more to share, and you don't want to miss a thing. So hit that follow button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment below. There are moments in life when a person gets caught up in something without even realizing it, and tonight was one of those nights for me. Everything had started out ordinarily, but it carried a breaking point within. an irreversible night. As I sipped my tea in the kitchen, I flinched at the notification that popped up on my phone. It was a message from James. "I'm at the office again tonight. Work is really busy. I'll be home tomorrow night." Before I even finished reading the sentence, a mix of warmth and frustration spread through me. A lie. I had gotten used to these messages by now. Every time he came up with a different excuse, but I knew the truth. There was no us anymore. James's mind and body belonged to someone else. I set my mug down on the counter with a thud. I felt like I couldn't breathe. In the kitchen, in this house, in this marriage, I looked at myself in the mirror. I was 40, but I was still beautiful. My tall, slender figure, my still eye-catching curves, my slightly wavy auburn hair, and yet James's eyes were not on me anymore. A burst of laughter from the living room snapped me out of my thoughts. Liam and Noah, my nephew and his best friend. They had been around a lot lately. Noah worked at his uncle's repair shop during the summers. He was skilled, a little reckless, but undeniably attractive with his strong hands, broad shoulders, and effortless confidence. The kind of man who turned heads without trying. When I walked into the living room, Liam was sprawled on the gaming chair while Noah had sunk his large frame into the couch, both of them glued to the screen, caught up in their competitive fun. For a moment, I watched Noah beside Liam, the faint wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, his sun-kissed arms, his easy smile. He was young, but he was a man. Attractive, yet unpredictable. I took a deep breath. "I'm going out," I said briefly. Liam lifted his head slightly and looked at me. "At this hour?" I shrugged. "Yeah." As I walked out, I felt Noah's brief glance on me, but I acted like I didn't notice. Something inside me had started stirring. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. I started the car and drove toward the city center. The sky had darkened, and a mix of restlessness and freedom coursed through me. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but stepping into a bar didn't seem like a bad idea. I wanted to lose myself in the crowd, to forget who I was for a little while. When I entered, the bar was dimly lit. Soft music played in the background, blending with the sound of laughter and conversation. I sat at the bar and ordered a drink. As I took the first sip, I realized that, for the first time in a long while, I felt relaxed. Finding myself here, sitting alone, not caring about the night, it was strange. But at the same time, I was letting something I had been suppressing come to the surface. After a while, I noticed that the men around me were looking at me. One of them leaned in, smiling as he tried to strike up a conversation. "Are you here alone?" I lifted my gaze to him. He was a good-looking man, well-dressed, confident, but nothing inside me stirred. I smiled but turned my head away, uninterested. Another one tried to approach, but they were all the same, empty, unappealing. After spending a few hours at the bar, I stepped outside and headed toward my car. The cool night breeze brushed against my skin. I got into the car and turned the key to start the engine, but nothing happened. I tried again. Still nothing. My car wouldn't start. I sighed, leaning back against the seat, closing my eyes for a moment. Then suddenly there was a tap on the window. I turned my head and found Noah standing there. "You need a ride?" he asked, his voice calm, steady. I hesitated for a moment before nodding. Yeah, looks like I do. He opened the passenger door for me. As I slid into his truck, the warmth of his presence filled the space between us. The tension, the curiosity, the unspoken words, it all settled in the quiet hum of the engine as he pulled onto the road.